Hey guys! For 3 years, Topping didn't update their DX7 line, mostly because it was good enough. But as new technology was making way into their newest DACs and headphone amplifiers, it was the right time revealing a flagship all-in-one device, and that's exactly how DX7 PRO Plus was revealed 1 minute ago. Now, I have already covered plenty of their stuff by now, and this time around we've got something different in terms of looks, but especially sound performance, so let's check it out. Ever since winning a Red Dot and Gold Pin Design Award with their DX5, something was telling me that a similar case would be used with their newest flagship all-in-one combo, and that's exactly what happened. Design-wise, the newest unit took a 180-degree turn, it's more future-fi in a way, and Topping describes it as gorgeous looking from every angle. We're still dealing with a high-quality craftsmanship with a fully CNC machined case. It's a little thinner this time around, it lost some weight as there isn't a linear transformer anymore. As for controls, you'll find 3 headphone jacks and a volume knob on its front plate. On its back, all the nicest digital inputs are present as USB, I2S, optical, coaxial, AAC, and there's a Bluetooth antenna socket as well. It offers a pair of RCA and XLR outputs that are volume controllable or fixed. As for tech inside it, they went with a flagship ES9038 Pro DAC chip of ESS Technologies that was used in current mode operation that will squeeze a little bigger dynamic range compared to voltage mode operation. They also made a current to voltage conversion stage. It was custom, made by Topping of course, that was called IV01, shielding it in a metallic box from remaining wireless interference. They replaced a linear transformer with a switching mode power supply, and while that might sound like a downgrade, they bypassed the need of big electrolytic capacitors, shortening the signal path in the process. The best XMOS receiver is on board and a brand new Bluetooth chipset that supports some of the nicest codecs as LDAC and aptX adaptive. Its headphone amplifier section is based on popular NFCA amplifier modules that are being used in their top dog A90 amplifier. This is their most powerful all-in-one unit, outputting 1.9 watts in 32 ohms and 300 milliwatts in 300 ohms, which should be more than enough in most situations. But we'll find more about that very soon. Alright guys, this is pretty much it, so let's hit some eardrums. If you're wondering how the little Topping is sounding more exactly, it's like putting a miniature version of their D90 SE flagship DAC on an A90 headphone amplifier. So it isn't exactly as powerful, it doesn't have an unlimited headroom, but the sound signature is definitely very alike. So it came out highly detailed, very linear, very honest sounding in a way, and I believe that its neutral approach to musical production will work really amazing with warm or dark sounding headphones. So in my case, it worked amazing with Kenerton, with Odyssey, with Meze headphones. It was able to drive most of them, with the exception of LCD4 and LCD5 that needed just a little bit more rumble down low in the bass. What I really like with this one is that Topping is offering you, is not offering you, love it or hate it type of sound, but free sound presets that are working on a hardware level. So you have your transistor sound, you have valve sound or tube sound, or sound preset off. Now in off position it will sound very technical, very detailed, very honest, very linear. Nothing will stand out. It will try to, just take a step back and just, disappear from your acoustic chain. If you want to make it slightly meaner, more impactful sounding, especially in the bass, then I believe transistor sound will sound like that. It will do exactly that. But I like the most its valve sound that was dropping a little bit the top octave, so it was rolling off parts of the upper treble while infusing a little bit of mid-range presence. I have several tube amplifiers at my place and I know exactly how they sound. And I do believe that this one tries to mimic their sound. So in my view, the second order and third order harmonics are slightly elevated with that valve sound, and all that happens on the hardware level inside its DSP, and that is actually quite interesting. I would never guess that I'm listening to an ESS Sabre DAC with an FCA headphone amplifier tech, because it doesn't sound like that, especially with that valve sound mode engaged. In either mode, it doesn't really matter. It was never bright sounding, it was never harsh sounding, it was never boring or clinical sounding, so you can use even bright tilted headphones as HiFiMans or many others, doesn't really matter. And I'm no longer getting a thin sound of the regular DX7 PRO, especially in the mid-range department. Then I decided using it in my stereo setup, so I've connected it directly to a firmware and Hypsos that worked as a preamplifier, followed by two benchmark AHB2 power amplifiers used in mono mode, and then by my KEF reference-free loudspeakers. And I observed that it was clearer, it was more focused, it was sharper a little sounding compared to my usual Gold Note DS10 Plus, which mind you is a lot more expensive. And before you go nuts, you should know that that firmware that works as a preamplifier is adding a massive helping hand, because with that in place, it sounds fuller bodied. Mid-range is just juicier, sweeter. The bass is certainly slightly more impactful, and the upper treble is a little more relaxed. So without that firmware in place, it sounds slightly clearer, so its preamplifier is definitely a little clearer compared to that of the Ferrum. It sounds a little faster, but I didn't feel it exactly as impactful. So bass and mid-range went down a notch, and treble information went up a notch. So in an entry to mid-level stereo setup, I would use it as it is, as a DAC and preamplifier. In a near-field setup, I would do the same, powering some active monitors. But in a high-end stereo setup, I would surely add a dedicated preamplifier. So this one doesn't have an actual preamplifier circuit, it doesn't have a powerful output stage, so it surely benefits from a dedicated preamplifier. Moving it into a headphone setup, starting with all sorts of dynamic and planar magnetic headphones, it was able to drive most of them with flying colors on high gain. So starting with Sennheiser HD800S, Kineton Rogner, RZH Phobos, even Odyssey LCD4 and LCD5 to a certain degree worked really nice. It was able to drive, control their drivers very well. Bass notes weren't really going to DAPs, and the mid-range wasn't as full-bodied as I wished for, but everything else was exactly as it's placed, so it worked really nicely. There was just a single headphone that refused to hit the dance floor, and that was HiFiMan Susvara. It didn't have enough power for them. Of course, it couldn't control them. Those sounded simply dead on arrival on this one, so I'm not recommending the HiFiMan Susvara, Abyss, HE6 on this one. That will not happen. So with the Odyssey LCD4, that was one of the most difficult load for this one. About 10 dB was remaining on top, which is enough but not a lot of headroom. Sometimes with some high dynamic range tracks, with some DSD recordings, I would be maxed out, so that's not so great. On one hand, it was never clipping, it was never heavily distorting, even on maximum power. On the other hand, the dynamics weren't really reaching their peaks, so it was not that engaging sounding with LCD4 and LCD5. So personally, I wouldn't use something like this with endgame headphones, with LCD4, LCD5, with Abyss, with HiFiMan Susvara. But for a budget-oriented setup, it would be more than enough for most headphones out there. Trying it with IEMs of all sorts and getting zero noises wasn't really a surprise anymore, because all the newest topping devices are performing pretty much the same. So they measured a noise floor of 2.5 microvolts on high gain and 1.2 microvolts on its low gain, which in my book is already world-class performance, so pretty much in line with some of the best measuring headphone amplifiers like topping A90, like SMSL SP400, like benchmark HPU4, so this is pretty much on the same level. So be it low gain, high gain, zero volume or maximum volume, it was simply noiseless whatsoever. It sounded if it isn't powered on at all. So you can use whatever IEMs you have, ultra sensitive ones, it doesn't really matter. It will be, completely noiseless. So it can be considered as a very IEM friendly unit. Moving on to Transient Response, all the newest topping amplifiers, all the newest ESS Sabre converters are regarded as super fast sounding, having shorter decays compared to transistor-based or tube-based amplifiers, and that was certainly the case with the newest DX7 PRO Plus. So it has shorter decays, it has sharper leading edges, but there was still some liquidity and some smoothness left, especially with that valve sound mode engaged. With all that said, something wasn't really clicking into place, so something wasn't putting me in between the hammer and the anvil. It wasn't as impactful, bold, as engaging, hard slamming, especially with my planar magnetics. Bass wasn't reaching those, deepest pits. I felt those bass notes a little ethereal, a little lighter weight. And that's precisely why Topping still sells dedicated headphone amplifiers. So in terms of speed, I believe that we got a 9 out of 10, and in terms of bass, slam, and impact, this one gets a solid 7 out of 10. As for Soundstage, it will not impress you right away. So it has a medium-sized soundstage. It will not add layers and sub-layers of sounds. It's not that big sounding, but if your headphones are fully driven by it, then sure enough, it would decompress your music. It would add some air in between the notes, but put some distorted rock and some cluttered electronica, and it will start choking down your headphones, and everything, will put inside your head. So sure enough, it sounds slightly bigger compared to its smaller brothers like DX5, like EX5, but it's not that big sounding compared to that A90 and A30 Pro headphone amplifiers. So it's close to impossible making a small and affordable unit that will sound good and great on everything, and it seems that Soundstage and depth were hit by the downgrade hammer. With all that said, I believe that all other NFC amplifiers, PLFC amplifiers, and THX AAA amplifiers are sounding pretty much the same in terms of scale of the music. Even that benchmark HPA4 that I've used for about 3 years, sounding very, very similar, so it was not that big or super layered. May I suggest a Class A amplifiers, fully discrete amplifier, or tube-based amplifier if you want, a bigger scale of your music. Moving on to detail retrieval, it does remind me a lot about their flagship D90 SE DAC, which was just a little bit clearer sounding compared to this one. So the little guy felt extremely close to that one, making it just an absolute steal of a DAC, with a preamp and headphone amplifier section coming as an added bonus. So it was highly resolving, highly detailed, very transparent, call it as you please. It was pushing forward as much information as possible, so in my view this is a very clean, probably the most impressive part about this one is actually detail retrieval. So if you combine a flagship ESS Sabre DAC used in current mode operation with some transparent sounding NFCA amplifier modules, then you are definitely getting the sound of a DX7 PRO Plus put in this small and lightweight chassis. In my view, it sounded impressively clean, but it was never going overboard with that over sharpness, so it has good linearity, meaning that it was never boring or bright sounding. You can even add some bright sounding headphones and that wouldn't be a problem. However, you can still add some color with transistor or valve sound enhancements for a different flavor. Moving on to frequency response, I felt a higher presence in the mid bass and a lower presence of the sub bass. So everything was quite weighty and there was enough heft with my music, but it seems that NFC amplifier modules are putting a bigger accent on bass quality rather than on bass quantity. Sometimes I wished for a better bass impact, especially in the sub bass, but nothing does it better than that transistor sound enhancement. So with the right selection of headphones and loudspeakers and with the right preset, then I had all that bass energy that I wished for. Still, you should know that this is a linear tuned DAC, preamp and headphone amplifier, so expect bass notes only when those are called for. Its mid-range will change quite a lot depending on the sound preset. So if you enjoy neutral sounding DAC amp combos, then I believe sound preset off will sound the best for you. If you want a stronger bass and mid-range delivery than transistor, sound will sound the best for you. And if you want even more mid-range presence and a little bit of roll-off in the upper treble, then valve sound will sound the best for you. With all that said, regardless of the sound preset, it was still not exactly full-bodied, sweet or juicy sounding in the mid-range as all discrete class amplifiers were doing. Still, it was a little warmer and it was a little smoother sounding compared to regular THX AAA amplifiers. There wasn't a single topping unit that didn't impress me right away with a very precise, linear, defined, extended treble delivery, and this one is really no different. If you ever tried an NFC amplifier by now by topping, then this one sounds pretty much the same. So expect just powerful snare drum hits, expect some very defined cymbals that have that natural shimmer and natural decay. Its predecessor had more treble ringing in here, making it a troublesome partner with bright sounding headphones, but I'm glad that topping solved that issue and you can use bright sounding headphones, no problem on this one. In the end, we are getting absurd levels of detail retrieval, a see-through transparency, a wide frequency response, all the speed and acceleration at the cost of a gentler punch in the bass, of a smaller soundstage, and of a weaker headphone amplifier section. With all that said, this is still a very impressive unit, very feature-packed. It has a good preamplifier section, it has the highest spec Bluetooth receiver, and of course a very honest sounding DAC section that wouldn't sugarcoat your music. And for all of the reasons combined, I believe that it deserved my silver award. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed my review. My full in-depth review can be found below. Please check that out. And as usual, listen to my tunes, be positive, and I'll see you around. Cheers!